In 1940, somewhere inside a German military design bureau, a group of engineers gathered around a photograph that had just arrived from America. It showed a squat, box-shaped vehicle with no roof, no armor, and tires that looked barely thicker than bicycle wheels. The caption simply read, "U.S. Army Light Reconnaissance Car." The German engineers laughed. They compared it to their meticulously crafted Kübelwagen, air-cooled, engineered with precision, and stamped with the confidence of German design. To them, the American vehicle looked like a toy, crude, unrefined, and ridiculous for war. One German officer reportedly joked, "If this is their idea of a fighting car, the war will be over by Christmas." But what those engineers didn't know was that behind that ugly little machine was a race against time, a story of desperation, innovation, and American ingenuity under pressure. In the summer of 1940, the US Army faced a terrifying reality. War was spreading across Europe, and America was woefully unprepared. Generals realized they needed a fast, lightweight vehicle that could go anywhere, mud, sand, snow, or jungle, and could be built by the thousands. So the Army issued a challenge to every automaker in the country. Design a four-wheel drive reconnaissance car that could carry 3 soldiers and a .30 caliber machine gun, and deliver a working prototype in 49 days. 49 days. That's all. No extensions, no excuses. It was an impossible request. Most automakers didn't even bother. But one tiny, struggling company called the American Bantam Car Company said yes. With a skeleton crew of engineers and mechanics working day and night in Butler, Pennsylvania, they sketched, welded, and assembled a miracle on wheels. By the end of those 49 days, the first prototype, the Bantam reconnaissance car, rolled out of the garage. It had a small 45 horsepower engine, 4-wheel drive, and a body that looked like it had been hammered together with pure willpower. Army officials couldn't believe it. It was crude, but it worked. It climbed hills, waded through mud, and handled terrain that would have stopped trucks cold. The Army immediately wanted more, but Bantam was too small to build them in mass numbers. So the government handed the blueprints to 2 larger manufacturers, Willys Overland and Ford. Willys refined the design with a more powerful engine. Ford perfected the manufacturing, and together they created the Willys MB, the vehicle that would soon be known simply as the Jeep. When the first shipments reached Europe and North Africa, German soldiers saw them for the first time. They called it der kleine Ami-Wagen, the little American car. And they still laughed until they saw what it could do. While German half-tracks bogged down in sand, the Jeep skimmed over dunes like a mountain goat. It carried men, ammunition, stretchers, radios, anything. It could be dropped from planes, driven off landing craft, or towed behind tanks. It had no armor, no elegance, just brute determination built into every bolt. The Jeep was fast becoming the embodiment of the Allied soldier. Simple, adaptable, unstoppable. Wherever there was mud, chaos, or fire, it was there, a rolling reminder that victory didn't always come from perfection. Sometimes it came from persistence, and soon the Germans who laughed at it would be trying to steal it. Section 2. The field test of fire. The desert of North Africa in 1942 was a place where machines went to die. Engines seized in the heat, tires shredded on the rocks, German and British convoys scattered across miles of nothingness, each battle more about endurance than firepower. And into this furnace rolled the Jeep. When the US Army joined the North African campaign, the Jeep became its heartbeat. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was the blood in the veins of the Allied advance. It carried medics to the wounded, officers to the front, and messages that would decide entire battles. It pulled anti-tank guns through sand, ferried ammunition under fire, and served as a mobile command post for generals who refused to sit still. At first, German officers didn't know what to make of it. Captured jeeps were hauled to Rommel's engineers for inspection. The reports were almost dismissive. A simple 4-cylinder vehicle, crude suspension, no armor, minimal parts, no refinement. But the same reports ended with one reluctant admission. And yet, it continues to function. Rommel's men began capturing jeeps wherever they could, not to destroy them, but to use them. The Afrika Korps repainted them with German insignia and drove them straight back into battle. Why? Because the jeep didn't care who was behind the wheel. It just worked. It could go places tanks couldn't, and do jobs trucks weren't built for. It was faster than a Kübelwagen, lighter than a truck, and more agile than any armoured car. One German officer wrote in his diary, "The Americans have built a machine that ignores the laws of mechanics." The jeep didn't care about prestige or engineering pride. It didn't care about awards or design patents. It cared about getting there and getting back. While other armies over-engineered their vehicles, the Americans built something that could be fixed with a wrench and a tin can. In one famous incident near El Getar, a jeep carrying an officer and his driver took a direct hit from a German 20mm shell. The shell passed through the thin metal body, entering through one side, exiting through the other, without detonating. The driver, barely scratched, looked at the smoking hole in the door and shouted, "Guess we're ventilated now." He drove the jeep another 12 miles before stopping. By the time the North African campaign ended, the jeep had earned a reputation, not just as a tool, but as a companion. Soldiers gave them nicknames, painted teeth on the hoods, and treated them like trusted war dogs. And as the battlefront moved from the burning sands of Africa to the hedgerows of Europe, the jeep followed, ready to face new roads, new mud, and new laughter from those who still didn't understand. Because for the jeep, the war had only just begun. Section 3, the vehicle that never quit. By mid-1943, the little American jeep had stopped being a curiosity. It had become a rumor, a story whispered between Allied soldiers across continents. Men arriving on new fronts didn't ask if jeeps were there. They asked how many. From the deserts of North Africa, they now rolled across the mountains of Italy and into the mud-soaked fields of France. Everywhere they went, they carried the same message. This war would be fought on 4 small wheels. In Sicily, jeeps led the invasion columns through winding coastal roads barely wide enough for a horse cart. When the trucks bogged down, the jeeps pushed through. When the tanks couldn't climb, the jeeps found another way. They towed field guns up goat paths, ferried wounded men down cliffs, and hauled supplies where no supply route existed. The Germans couldn't believe it. Captured jeeps continued to appear on their side of the lines, each one carefully studied, stripped, and reassembled. They discovered that the vehicle's magic wasn't in its complexity, it was in its brutal simplicity. Flat fenders that doubled as workbenches, seats that could be lifted to access the fuel tank, a windshield that folded down to reduce glare and wind resistance. It was a machine designed not for comfort, but for soldiers who didn't have time to care about comfort. In Italy, a British commando unit once drove a jeep straight off a pier onto a small boat, crossed a canal, and then simply drove off the other side. No repairs, no hesitation. The men laughed and said, "Try that in a Kübelwagen." The jeep had become the unofficial mascot of Allied adaptability, the symbol of a military that solved problems with determination, not blueprints. By 1944, the jeep had become an indispensable part of the Allied war machine. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a foundation. Radio operators turned them into mobile communication posts. Engineers fitted them with stretchers and red crosses, transforming them into makeshift ambulances. Snipers mounted rifles on the hood. And when Patton's Third Army blitzed across France, his officers rode in jeeps, the general himself famously standing in the passenger seat, helmet gleaming in the wind. Eisenhower would later call it one of the 4 tools that won the war, alongside the C-47 Dakota, the landing craft, and the bazooka. He described it as America's greatest contribution to modern warfare. German reports began to change in tone, where once they mocked, now they respected. A Wehrmacht engineering memo from late 1944 read, "The American 4-wheel vehicle demonstrates a remarkable capacity for endurance. Its production method is crude, yet its efficiency is unmatched." That phrase, crude but efficient, captured everything about the Jeep. It wasn't elegant like a Panzer or sleek like a Messerschmitt. It was muddy, loud, and rattled with every bump. But it moved. It always moved. Across shell-pocked fields and frozen forests, over mine-strewn roads and makeshift bridges, it rolled on. In the winter of 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, Jeeps became lifelines. When supply trucks couldn't make it through the snow, Jeeps did. They carried food, ammunition, and wounded men under constant artillery fire. Drivers wrapped scarves around their faces, eyes frozen to the road, hands blistered from the cold steering wheel. And they never stopped. One soldier described it best. "You didn't drive a Jeep. You just held on and prayed it didn't stop." By then, the Germans weren't laughing anymore. They were taking notes. Section 4. From Warfront to Legend. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, something strange happened. The world's most famous soldiers weren't men. They were machines. And among them all, the humble Jeep stood tallest. From the beaches of Normandy to the ruins of Berlin, from the jungles of Burma to the streets of Paris, the same little vehicle appeared in every photograph. Dusty, dented, and carrying men who had survived the impossible. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a witness. In liberated villages, children climbed onto Jeeps as if they were carnival rides. Civilians painted "Merci America" on the sides. French partisans waved from the back as they rolled through cheering crowds. The Jeep became the face of freedom, the 4-wheeled proof that the Allies had arrived. For the soldiers, it was more than a tool. It was a friend. When the war ended, many tried to buy their Jeeps from the army to take home. Some officers smuggled them onto ships. Others watched with heavy hearts as their Jeeps were sold off, dismantled, or left behind. But the Jeep's story didn't end with peace. It had proven too valuable to vanish. Governments across the world ordered thousands more. Rebuilt models became ambulances, farm trucks, postal carriers, and police vehicles. Even Germany, the nation whose engineers once laughed at it, quietly studied its design. When the new Bundeswehr formed after the war, their own light utility vehicles bore an undeniable resemblance to the Jeep. The vehicle's DNA had changed warfare and industry. Its influence could be seen in every 4x4 that followed. The Land Rover, the Toyota Land Cruiser, even the civilian Jeep Wrangler that would carry its name decades later. But beyond the steel and rubber, the Jeep left something deeper. A lesson. That sometimes the most powerful ideas aren't born in grand laboratories or perfect blueprints. They're born in garages, under pressure, from necessity and grit. During the war, over 640,000 Jeeps were built. They crossed deserts, rivers, jungles, and cities. They towed aircraft, carried generals, rescued the wounded, and ferried the dead. They drove through every climate, every front, and every kind of hell imaginable, and came out the other side. In 1945, an American war correspondent wrote, "If this war has a soul, it runs on 4 wheels and answers to one name, Jeep." From a 49-day prototype built in a small Pennsylvania shop to a global icon of endurance, the Jeep became more than a vehicle. It became a statement that strength isn't always found in size, that victory isn't always born from perfection, and that sometimes the simplest machine can carry the greatest burden of all, the weight of a world at war.